Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of Disabled Warrior Plus. My name is Daniel. I am the chair of the Association of Disabled Warriors. Today we have Emily for Emily. Emily is.
Sorry. Who am I? Go on.
I got about 8 of these, and I haven't quite got yet. Emily is a paralegal at the Effective Book Inquiry, which is one of the biggest inquiries in the history of British inquiries in British politics. It's an inquiry about a Miss Emily. Emily is also the executive assistant at the Association of Disabled Lawyers, so she works together with me. Emily also passed the bar course and is an expiring barrister. Hello, Emily. How are
Hi.
you?
I'm good. I'm good.
Can you tell us a bit more about the Effective Book Inquiry?
Well, I can. Yeah, I can't say too much because obviously, like, secrets. Don't want to get sacked. But essentially, the Infected Blood Inquiry is looking into the reasons how and why lots of NHS patients, particularly haemophiliacs or pregnant women or people who went in for operations who received blood products, were able to be infected with bloodborne viruses such as HIV, hepatitis C, hepatitis B, and sometimes hepatitis A. Yeah, that's kind of what we do. So we're just sort of trying to figure out if there was fault, and if there was fault, when it occurred and whose fault it was.
Thanks, Emily. Obviously, Emily has a much great understanding of the inquiry, which you will, of course, expect. Emily, again, thank you. We're doing this campaign, as you know, because we want to raise the awareness of disabled warriors and to encourage disabled people to pursue legal careers. What does being disabled mean to you?
What does being disabled mean to me? For me, it means trying to figure out how I can be like everybody else and do what everybody else does without it being too much of a hindrance for myself, for one, on a practical level. And two, I think being disabled for me, I don't know, it's a weird question because it's just part of who I am. Like, it's really odd. I wouldn't change it, even though I sit and cry about it sometimes. I get really frustrated. Being disabled to me is just part of my identity, and it's something that I feel very connected to, and I think it allows me to make connections with other people.
So, I mean, everybody gives a good answer correct question, and I find that quite interesting. As you know, we've been doing these interviews for a while now, and it's good to see the range of different answers we get. Sometimes we get very medically focused answers, sometimes we look at the barriers in society and the impact of them on us because of our impairments. Sometimes we talk about like just being the nature of life, a bit like yourself. And it is interesting how it's different for everyone else. And I think that's the key thing about disability employment. It's an opportunity for people to talk about what it means to them and to be visible and proud of who we are, the people in the community, and the way people have become varies. What goes mean? What goes against ability pride means to you?
Disability pride for me comes down to two things. The first is a very personal thing, and that's about trying to, despite all of the negative feelings that we can often feel about being disabled, trying to see past that and view it as an asset. You know, I think there are parts of my disabilities that, and some people call them superpowers. I don't sort of go down that line of reasoning. But I think that it does give me insight into certain aspects or skills that I think other people who aren't like me don't have. So it's about trying to see pride in the fact that my differences allow me to be special, or in fact, a better way to put it is maybe allow me to be useful in a way that I think other people can't. And the second thing about disability pride is about being proud of what the disabled community rather, has achieved over, I mean, in the last 100 years, I mean, we've made lots of strides, but I think in general, disabled people have always existed and we're always going to exist. And I think disability pride is an opportunity for us to really look at everything that we've achieved, especially in the last sort of 50 or so years, and say, actually, do you know what? We're making a name for ourselves. We're getting ourselves out there. We're visible now, and we're important. We're just as important as everybody else, and we're just as valuable as everybody else. And it's about time everybody else recognize that, isn't it?
It is. It really is. I mean, I still think that we're not. I really don't think we are. I think that's demonstrated about people's attitudes towards disabled people. Especially the way people communicate with us. I mean, it varies depending on how you appear, but the way people respond to us. Lack of supporting education and employment, which we both know about. And I think you're right. People need to recognize that. I like the way you mentioned our history, because we give us some really cool parts in our history. I mean, I like the 1990s protest. They're my favorite bit. Where we, well, I say we, I was a baby, but a community protest the rights movement, and we got disability discrimination out, but when we went into well, I think disabled people broke into parliament and saved themselves. That was pretty powerful, and I think maybe we need a bit more of that.
Oh, really? What are you proposing? I'll talk to you afterwards.
I vote for things that we do. um, you mentioned your impairment, and one question I always ask about people that might answering it is, will you mind telling us a bit more about what your impairment or disability is, and then hopefully that might inspire people with similar disabilities in following your process.
Yeah, sure. I mean, do you have a pen and paper? There are quite a few.
Look,
So I think
you can pick and choose which ones you mention, or you can just deal with the question however you feel most comfortable.
so I think the disability I've had for the longest period of well, not the one I've had for the longest period of time, but the one that I have known about, and I think the one that causes me the most distress is my obsessive compulsive disorder. For people who aren't aware, obsessive compulsive disorder is a mental health illness, which essentially gravitates around being distressed by upsetting intrusive thoughts and trying to offset those intrusive thoughts or cancel them out by performing a certain behavior. So I won't go into detail on what my distressing thoughts are, but they tend to be very violent in nature, and they can impact my ability to perform certain day-to-day tasks. My other disabilities are more neurodivergence based disabilities. So I have dyslexia, dyspraxia, ADHD, and autism. And those things sort of are more wibbly wobbly, sort of fit together in a very, I explain it like a soup almost, you know, it's very difficult to sort of separate the carrots from the peas. They're just all there floating about, and they interact with each other differently. And I think that has an impact on my day-to-day life sometimes. But to be honest with you, those neurodivergence disabilities, personally for me, have more of an impact on my work than my personal life.
Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, you mentioned OCD. People often think it's just about watching eggs or keeping it clean, kissing or facing order, but it's not like that, and I think it's important that you mention that because people, I think even the best people joke about having OCD because we like to put things in order, and I think it's, like you say, it's much more than that, and people need to be aware of that.
Yeah, I think the other thing as well is because it's so misinformed, people don't realize they have it. You know, people will be like, well, I don't have OCD because I don't get upset when photo frames aren't perfectly straight, or I don't feel the need to wash my hands all the time, and all this sort of stuff. But actually, OCD can be something as simple as obsessing over photographs. You know, if you look at photographs obsessively and it's to offset some sort of a thought that you have in your head, or ruminating, it can be things like that. Lots of people, I have friends who had OCD for years and had no idea. And I think the more that people who have the condition and who talk about it, the more people will understand that actually there's much more of a spectrum, and actually there are many ways to have OCD, much like there are many ways to have lots of different disabilities.
Well, that's one of the aims of this campaign, so I'm grateful that you mentioned it because now people can be more aware. Emily, could you tell us a bit more about what you told us a bit about the inquiry at the beginning because I was woefully unaware. Can you tell us what you do? I know you can't mention what you find, but can you tell us what the role of a paralegal is?
Yeah, so at the inquiry, the role of a paralegal is very varied. We get quite a lot of variation of work and different responsibilities, I think more so than any law firm that I'd worked at previously, which is great on the experience side. So what I do is I have a mix of document review, which is where I look at evidence. So historical evidence, that would be things like medical records, meeting minutes from blood service providers in Scotland, NHS Scotland, NHS England and Ireland and Wales, witness statements from people who have written into the inquiry to give their account of what happened to them. And I review those and see and basically essentially rate them in sense of importance and pick out any important details that might be relevant to the lines of work that we do. Another thing that I have done is I have written a few reports which essentially go into detail on specific areas. So I wrote one about autologous transfusion, An autologous transfusion is where blood is transfused out of one patient prior to an operation, and then their blood is stored and transfused back into them during the operation that happens at a later date. And I looked into reasons why that was a good method or why it was a bad method, etc. There's pros and cons, and drew some conclusions. The thing I do at the moment is I read witness statements and find witness statements of people who have written into the inquiry saying this really horrible thing happened to me, and I read it and I look for criticisms of medical institutions or doctors or medical practitioners, and I help those people, those witnesses, raise those criticisms and give those doctors or health organizations an opportunity to respond to those criticisms. And it also, a lot of this work involves contacting clients via letter. It's lots of letter writing, lots of document review, lots of evidence collecting, and lots of analysis.
It sounds like a fantastic role because you've got a combination of pure legal skills, like analysis, checking analyzing witness statements, research, writing, dealing with people in meetings and what. It sounds like you get the opportunity to develop a wide range of different films.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's why I've stayed there so long. I've been there for 2.5 years now, so I really enjoy it.
It sounds like you're also you work with the Association of Disabled Lawyers. Do you want to tell us a bit about what you do with us?
For the Association of Disabled Lawyers, well, I what don't I do? No, so really, my
It's a good answer because you give an awful lot.
well, I mean, I'm kind of just your right-hand man, really. I can't really think of a particular. I do a bit of everything, don't I? Because I do a bit of subtitling when it's needed. I talk on panels when required. Did one a couple of days ago, which was of disability, disabled and proud, which was great. I'm trying to think. What do? I do lots of stuff. I haven't wrote a list.
Emily is quite right to say she is my right-hand person. She is my right-hand person because I know a bit of everything that goes. Emily organizes meetings, you minute as well, you represent the Association of BHP Taskforce, where you lean on our recommendations or regulatory change. You liaise with lawyers on our behalf. You do everything with, and you're getting involved in a combination of law and charitable or organizational. So it's a good combination for policy development. You had a good career, obviously. What has been the best part of your career?
The best part of my career, I wouldn't pin it on like a particular role that I did. I think in general, the best part of my career is just being able to meet lots of different people. I'm a people person. And I like meeting people that I can make connections with, whether or not that's other barristers or if that's clients. I had a really nice time when I worked at Hackney Community Law Centre, because I was dealing with some really super people actually who were experiencing some real hardship. And it's just really nice to be able to spend time with people, especially, there's a lot of vulnerability involved in the legal profession. You're dealing with colleagues who are very stressed all the time, and you're also dealing with clients who are very upset and distressed all the time. And I think it's something you don't get in every line of work, the ability to be able to connect with people who kind of need you, but also kind of don't, like, you know, you're kind of just supporting them through it. And I think that's the thing that I like most about it.
Yeah, it is one of those legal professionally one when you have to be comfortable with people, I think. As you say, and particularly when you work in law centers or pro, you're arguing with people in vulnerable situations, and even the professionals are vulnerable, as you say, because of high levels of stress and well-being, and if you're embarrassing yourself employed, so income isn't guaranteed. It's a lot of stress involved, and that's why it's important to have people like you doing these things as it makes a difference. I mean, spoke about what you like about your role. What has been the worst experience of your career?
So the worst experience of my career is when I kind of got sacked, kind of left before they could sack me thing.
Okay,
So
yeah, Emily told me story a few days ago at Disabled Lawyer and Paralyzed. A recording will be available soon, but if you haven't seen that, Emily, can you remind us?
so essentially I started working a job at a big law firm, well-known law firm, and everything seemed to be going fine. I had my first appraisal and it was all very good. That was after the 4th week. And then on the 5th week, things started to get a bit rocky. And the partner had an issue with my work. So I went to HR and I was like, look, I think I need a bit more support because I think I have these disabilities. I really am, I'm struggling with letters and stuff. I'm struggling to spot mistakes where there shouldn't be. And I just think I need a little bit more support with that. And they basically were like, oh, we can't offer you any. So I was like, okay, cool. And as a result, I essentially ended up being told, you're a goner. So they were like, my manager was like, yeah, we're not gonna take you on. So you have like a couple of weeks basically, and then bye-bye. So I was like, oh goodness, okay. So I got in touch with I applied for a job at the Inquiry, and I got it a week later, and off I ran. So that was a really negative experience for me, and I think the reason it was so negative is because I knew that there was a problem and I knew that I needed help, and I wasn't given that help and that support. And I think it's really telling that without that support, I lasted less than 8 weeks in that job. But when I went to the Inquiry, I did the same thing. I was like, look, I think I have these disabilities. I need help and support with this. And it was immediately, I was given all the software I needed. IT downloaded everything I needed. My manager was great. And I've been there for 2.5 years. And I think it's an indication that if you don't give disabled people the support that they need, they will crash and they will burn. And it doesn't mean they're bad at their jobs. You know, if I was bad at my current job, I wouldn't be there. If I have reasonable adjustments, if I have support, I'm a valued member of staff, you know, and it's worth having me there. And it's the same for other disabled people.
I did want to clarify when you talk about support, you are, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but you are talking about requesting reasonable adjustments on
Yeah,
the duty to provide reasonable adjustments found in the Equality Act,
yeah,
which, which law firms and other organizations, employers, and so forth are obliged to comply with. Am I correct?
Yeah. So
So I just wanted to clarify it was a bit more than just asking for a bit of help. It was a pop. It was, you were using your right to reasonable adjustment. And that was, it failed in that way. There you go. Thank you for that. What would you like people to take from your journey?
my journey. I feel like I haven't spoken much about my journey, so maybe I'll talk a little bit about that first. I would say that in terms of getting a diagnosis, I didn't realize for a really long time that I had uh, learning disabilities. It wasn't until I was 25, and that was because of a multitude of factors. Firstly, when I was at school, I was top of the class, and despite the fact that I would often be very distressed and I would cry a lot and I'd get very frustrated, it was always put down to stress. There was never any indication from any of my teachers that I could possibly ever have a learning disability. Obviously, now knowing what I know, I feel quite a lot of grief about that. I feel like I was let down. And I feel very frustrated not by my teachers, because they didn't have the resources to worry about a child that was getting A stars. Who cares? She's getting A stars. I got bigger fish to fry. You know, it was the system that let me down. And actually, I ended up in a massive state of distress. I mean, I was so stressed during my A levels that my hair fell out. And it didn't matter how many times I was trying to say to people something's wrong. It was always dismissed as something else. And I think to other people, I would say, if you think something is the matter, it probably is. You know yourself better than anybody else does. And I think that's the thing that any disabled person will tell you, is that you will know about your impairment or your disability, even if it's not diagnosed yet. You will know about that better than anybody else. Any doctor you will see, I was about to say psychiatrists, but they're doctors as well. So you know what I mean? Any professional, you have the know-how, and it's about being able to know when to act and how to get the help that you need. And that's so frustrating, and it's often an uphill battle. I mean, I still have to fight now for these things. But just don't give up, I think, and just be aware that if you need help, try and get it with all your might. The other thing I would bear in mind as well with my journey is I think you have to know when to tell people to shove it. And I mean that genuinely. I turned up for an exam with my BPTC provider for my civil litigation and criminal litigation exams. And on the door, they told me that there was a mistake and that they was a mistake. They hadn't given me my reasonable adjustments, and I had a choice. I could either sit it without my reasonable adjustments, or I could go home. So what I did was what any person in that situation would do, and I sobbed in the corridor and I said, well, I'm here, I might as well do it. And I sat the exams, and unsurprisingly, I failed them. And I had a job lined up that required me to have the BPTC. So I ended up not being able to do that job. I ended up completely skint. I ended up having to take out a credit card, which I then maxed out. I was in 5K of literal credit card debt because I was unemployable. I was also then trying to do these blooming exams, and it's situations like that where you think, if they'd have just done what they were legally obligated to do, I probably wouldn't have been in that position, and that taught me a valuable lesson, which was like, as from my point, is when to tell people to, jog on. So when I later had a situation where in pupillage this year, interviews, there was one chambers that said that they were going to give me my reasonable adjustments, and then on the day I received sod all. And I didn't stand for it. I sat in when the interview came on, I said, "You are aware that I was supposed to have reasonable adjustments and you did not provide them to me." And, I didn't get called back for a second round interview. And quite frankly, I don't care. And I ain't applying there again. Because that was a set that was like, oh, yeah, we encourage people who have disabilities to apply. And they literally on their website herald themselves as being champions of disability rights. Yeah, sure. And I think it's about understanding that, you know what? I am valuable. If you're disabled, you are important and you shouldn't be treated badly or detrimentally compared to other people. And so, sorry, I've gone like a really roundabout way of basically saying there are two things I take away from my journey. One, if you think there's something wrong with you, for the love of God, try and figure out what it is as soon as possible. And if someone tells you no and you still think there's something wrong with you, you've got to push for it because you're probably right. And two, when you find out, if you have confirmation and then you then need reasonable adjustments, make sure that you just get them. And if somewhere doesn't give them to you, they're probably not worth your time.
Yeah, a bit about you get be knowing yourself and being confident in how well you know yourself when you're seeking support, and the lack of support you receive in education. Yeah, it goes back to that question around, yeah, you can't win because I know it's terrible phrases, but I can't think of better ones at the moment. But if you're high functioning like you are, you don't get the help because you appear to be functioning to a high level, which you undoubtedly were, unsurprisingly. Yeah,
Absolutely.
I
And the thing,
mean,
sorry, I'm going to interrupt you because I think there's something I didn't say that's quite important. And that's that the impact of all that stuff that happens to me, obviously, as you can tell from my tone, made me quite angry and frustrated. But it also made me really depressed. And, they say there's that phrase, isn't there, that success feeds success. And if you're being slapped down at every attempt and to grasp an opportunity and to further your career or further your personal advancements, it wears you down. And I think this is something that any disabled person needs to understand. That I've spoken to other disabled people. I mean, Dan, you've spoken about it yourself. That feeling of being worn down by constantly having to assert your own right that you are legally entitled to. It's a full-time job in itself, right? So to then have to deal with that and then have to push through with all the other stuff like maintaining a full-time job and applying for pupillage. I mean, truly, champions of resilience we are. Because otherwise we just wouldn't cope. Sometimes I think, what do people want me to do? Just like sit in a hole for the rest of my life and do nothing? Like,
I know, we all do need you, so I'll try to keep it in the usual way. But you're right, because yeah, you get worn down by fighting for what the law says you're entitled to. You get worn down by the way people treat you. You get worn down by the systems we have to engage with being on the focus. You get bogged down by not being able to do exams, not being able to get on public transport, not being able to get adequate support, and I think you raised a point about keep going and we are resilient. But I also think it's also, I also think it's important to say, and I know you agree with me, it's okay not to be okay. Um,
Yeah.
like, yeah, we are redoing and we keep fighting, particularly we, uh, our roles involve campaigning for systematic change. In legal profession, and we do it at home and we do it at work. We always battle, but yeah, I think for how often we talk about being resilient and fantastic problem solvers, and maybe we don't talk enough about, you know what, sometimes we get more going, sometimes we're not okay, and that's okay.
Yeah,
Um,
I completely
I
agree.
don't know whoever might be watching you. You need to hear, yeah, it's okay not to be okay, and I'm sure whoever you are, it will be somebody who's happy to listen to you. Um, and if you're not sure about her, give us an email, and we'll listen to you. Um, more of us will, and that's an important thing. I mean, I completely honest. Track of where we were, but I think that's an important thing. Um, and then, yeah, I, I constant thing about getting reasonable adjustments. It's a hard one, but yeah, every gave two very important pieces of advice, and I'm sure we will help you. My my last question: what do you think the key issues are in disability rights right now?
There's so
It's hard
It's
for
like it's one
people
of
that
those.
don't, for
Oh,
people
sorry.
that don't know, Emily will be interviewing me next, and when I get asked that question, I think that will be 40 minutes in itself.
I'm gonna keep it really, really short, and I'm just gonna say, firstly, any practical problem that you could probably think of in relation to any one disability is probably a problem. is probably an issue at the moment. I mean, I'll use a stat that I think was used in a previous interview, but on an accessibility issue, I mean, I can walk without I can walk unaided, but lots of people can't, and especially if you're wheelchair bound, or wheelchair user. I don't know if I should say wheelchair bound. I don't know what the term is. Sorry, everyone. If you're a wheelchair user, um,
Yeah, wheelchair is where we are. Wheelchair bound is a bit
yeah,
like,
it sounds like you're trapped, doesn't it? Like it's like
yeah,
no.
like a really good and a really good TikTok. I can't remember the creator, but he talked about language, and when wheelchair bound comes up, they go from being in a wheelchair in a normal situation, and then the camera cuts out and comes back in, and they're lying on their back in a wheelchair in bed. And
I really
playing like what a wheelchair user, because obviously we use it and then we get out and then we don't use it and then we use it again. What you would say?
sorry, when I said it, I was like, that doesn't, when you say something, you're like, that doesn't sound right. Like I feel like that wasn't right. But thank you. One thing I will say is it's always really important to talk to people with other disabilities, because you will learn the language that's appropriate for other disabilities. So in the same way that earlier on I was able to explain about OCD, Dan's been able to explain to me about the appropriate terms for wheelchair users. And it's that kind of communication that we need to stay strong, as a movement. Because I do find that sometimes some disabled people discriminate against other disabled people, and you're just sat there like, Oh my gosh. Read the room. Anyway, wheelchair users, if you're a wheelchair user, bad luck, I'm afraid, because if you're a barrister, you're not going to be able to get into something like 80% of courts, which is
Yeah,
just insane. So I think accessibility is obviously a massive, massive problem. And I also think that the other massive problem is um I've forgotten the word. I'm so sorry. What's that? I'm having a word finding problem. That thing where not visibility. Well, what people think about disabled people. What's that called?
perception.
That's it. Yeah. So people's perceptions of disabled people is a massive issue. I was speaking to a barrister from who was on a pupillage committee some years ago, and she said there was a blind, visually impaired woman that applied for pupillage. She got to final round, and people on the panel were like, "Yeah, we want to give her pupillage." But there was one person that was like, "Yeah, but she's blind. I just don't think she's going to be able to do it." And it was because of that she wasn't given pupillage. And like that's fully 100% what she told me. Obviously, I'm not going to say who it was or what chambers it was. And it was an experience like that, hearing that made me realize, wow, despite the fact that we disabled people can walk into a room, we can blow people away with our advocacy, our experience, our intelligence, and our aptitude for law. We can be cast aside purely because of our disability or our impairment. And very often they won't even, they wouldn't have told her that was the reason that she hadn't got pupillage. They would have given some other bogus reason, and they can do that without scrutiny as long as, people within their own circles don't speak up or say anything. And I also think, what a waste of talent. And so I think that's a big issue for us, is the perception of disabled people, this belief that, because I can't spell the word necessary, it means somehow I'm not going to be able to effectively defend my client in court. That's nonsense. We know that's nonsense. And, the more that we become visible, the more that we will be able to change people's perceptions. And it's why doing things like this is so important. And it's why, if you are disabled and you are watching this and you think, oh, maybe I won't be able to do law because I have a mental health condition that means that I wouldn't be cut out for the stress of it. Or she's just said that 80% of courts aren't accessible by wheelchair users, therefore there's no hope for me. That's not true. I do believe that we can change things, and it's the more of us that enter the profession, the more platform we're going to have, and the more people are going to have to listen, and the more people listen, the more they're going to have to change. So the biggest problems: access and perception, and then a whole list of others. But just take some hope and faith from this, that you're not, I used to think I was broken. You're not broken. You're not useless. You are valued, and you have insight that makes you valuable to the legal profession and to the people that you will defend.
Or positive. Um, yeah, wise words. I think that's a good point to bring it on, because we don't want to be too somber. I like to point out how people can offer something, and we support your experience to mean a change in working practices where we can overcome barriers, and it's important to focus on what we can offer rather than what the barriers stop us from being able to do. Actually, Emily, it's been great interview you, obviously. I know you will, but it's nice to be able to do this format. It's been a pleasure having you. For everybody else, take care. Thank you for watching another episode of this Lawyer and Proud. I look forward to seeing you for the next one, where I will be interviewed by Emma. That will be fun. Thank you, Janice. Well, bye bye.